Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be tackling something that's been on a lot of people's minds, I think it's safe to say.
Yeah.
And that is the climate crisis.
It's a big one.
It is a big one, and we're going to be doing it with the help of some material that a listener sent to us.
Okay.
It is a fictional podcast script.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it takes a pretty unconventional approach, I would say.
Unconventional in what way?
Well, let's just say that they're not afraid to use some humor and some pretty bold language to get their point across.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah. And it's interesting because while the script definitely uses humor as kind of a way to draw you in, it's also grounded in some pretty hard-hitting scientific facts, and it doesn't shy away from really,
laying it all out there?
Yeah, painting that stark picture of where we're headed if we don't start taking this seriously.
Right.
So, right off the bat, it mentions that global temperatures have already risen 1.2 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial times. And, that number might not seem huge on its own, right?
No, not necessarily.
But the way the script puts it into perspective is by comparing it to, a small asteroid wiping out an entire continent.
Wow.
It's like that kind of small change that can have these massive consequences that we don't even fully grasp.
Right. It's about those cascading effects.
Exactly. And we're already seeing those consequences play out,
Yeah, in a lot of ways.
The script reminds us that the last time Earth was this warm, sea levels were 20 meters higher.
20 meters. That's a lot.
It's hard to even fathom, right? Imagine the impact that would have on coastal communities today. I mean, just think about all the major cities that are located right on the coast.
It would be devastating.
Yeah. And then there's the increase in extreme weather events, too, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing that more and more.
The script specifically mentions the 2021 Pacific Northwest heat dome as an example.
Right.
And, that really hit home for me because it wasn't just a gradual warming trend. It was this sudden, intense heat wave that had these devastating effects on the region.
And it seems like those kinds of events are becoming more frequent.
Exactly. And the script connects this to the concept of these tipping points,
Tipping points.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of that?
I think so. But maybe you can refresh my memory.
It's they use this analogy of a Jenga tower in the script.
Oh, okay.
And it's like you pull out the wrong block and suddenly the whole thing comes crashing down.
I see.
And that's kind of how they're describing the Earth's systems,
It's all interconnected.
Exactly. So, you disrupt a key system like the Amazon rainforest or the Arctic sea ice, and it can have these ripple effects that we can't even predict.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah. And speaking of the Amazon, the script mentions how it's now emitting more carbon than it absorbs.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, which is terrifying because it's supposed to be this massive carbon sink, helping to regulate the climate.
Right. It's like the lungs of the planet.
Exactly. And then there's the Arctic losing a staggering 13% of its sea ice per decade.
That's incredibly fast.
I know, it's alarming, right? And the script highlights how those changes in one region can have these cascading effects globally. So we're not just talking about isolated weather events anymore. We're talking about the destabilization of entire planetary systems.
A domino effect.
Exactly. And what's even more disturbing is that the script points out how fossil fuel companies like ExxonMobil knew about this back in the 1970s.
Wait, what do you mean they knew about it?
They had their own scientists predicting this whole climate crisis.
Wow, so they were aware of the potential consequences of their actions.
Apparently so, but they didn't really do anything to address it.
So it's like they knew the house was on fire, but instead of calling 911, they just kept selling marshmallows.
That's the analogy the script uses. And it's pretty apt, I think, because there's been this deliberate effort to downplay and even deny the science for decades.
It's phone-buckling.
It really is like a real-life conspiracy thriller,
Yeah, it's crazy.
Okay, so we've got rising temperatures, extreme weather events, tipping points, and this whole cover-up by the fossil fuel industry. But it doesn't stop there.
There's more.
Oh, yeah. The script also delves into some lesser-known threats, like melting permafrost.
Melting permafrost. What's that?
It's basically this permanently frozen layer of ground that exists in really cold regions like the Arctic.
Okay.
And it contains vast amounts of methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas.
Uh-huh.
So as it thaws, this methane gets released into the atmosphere, accelerating climate change.
So it's like a vicious cycle.
Exactly. It's like a positive feedback loop that makes the problem worse.
Yikes.
And on top of that, the script throws in this whole terrifying possibility of ancient viruses being released from the melting permafrost.
Ancient viruses, like from thousands of years ago.
Yeah, I know it sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
That's a little scary.
It is a little scary, and while it might sound far-fetched, it is a legitimate concern.
So we're talking about potential pandemics as well as climate change.
Yeah, essentially, and the script isn't exaggerating the risks here. It's a potential Pandora's box that we're opening up.
It's like we're messing with forces we don't fully understand.
Exactly, and it's not just about the planet heating up, it's about all these cascading consequences that we're only just beginning to understand.
It's a whole web of interconnected issues.
Exactly, and we can't forget about the impact on our oceans either.
Oh, right. The oceans are absorbing a lot of that heat, aren't they?
Yeah, and the script describes them as turning into acid baths, which is a pretty vivid image.
Acid baths? That doesn't sound good.
No, it doesn't, but what exactly does that mean, what's happening beneath the surface?
Well, the oceans are absorbing a huge amount of the excess carbon dioxide we're pumping into the atmosphere. And this causes a chemical reaction that increases the acidity of the water.
Okay, so hence the acid bath analogy.
Yeah, exactly.
And what are the consequences of that?
It's devastating for marine ecosystems.
In what way?
Well, corals, shellfish, and other organisms that build shells from calcium carbonate are particularly vulnerable.
So like the building blocks of their very existence are being dissolved.
Exactly. And imagine trying to live in a swimming pool full of battery acid.
Ugh, no thanks.
That's essentially what we're doing to these creatures.
Okay, that image is definitely going to stay with me.
It's a powerful one.
And then, of course, there's the plastic pollution issue, too.
Oh, yeah, right. We can't forget about that.
The script highlights the prediction that by 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish.
More plastic than fish.
Yeah, just let that sink in for a minute.
Wow.
Think about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, this swirling vortex of plastic debris twice the size of Texas.
It's hard to even comprehend something that big.
I know it's a visual representation of our throwaway culture and its impact on the planet.
Yeah, it's like a giant monument to our wastefulness.
So it's like this multi-layered crisis. The planet's heating up, the ice is melting, the forests are burning, the oceans are acidifying, and we're drowning in plastic.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, and so far it doesn't sound very hopeful.
No, not really.
So where do we even begin to address all of this?
Well, that's where things start to get interesting, because the script doesn't just leave us with a sense of doom and gloom. It actually offers some potential solutions, both individual and collective.
Okay, that's what I'm curious about, because it's easy to feel overwhelmed and powerless in the face of something as big as the climate crisis. So what does the script suggest we can actually do about it?
Well, that's exactly what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, stay tuned, because this conversation is far from over.
We're just getting started. So, we've just uncovered some pretty unsettling realities about, the state of our planet.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is, but the script doesn't just sort of leave us there wallowing in despair.
Okay, pick.
It offers some, potential pathways forward, some things we can do.
That's what I'm hoping to dig into now, because honestly, after that last segment, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. I'm not going to lie.
That's understandable.
Like, what can one person actually do to make a difference in the face of all of this?
Yeah, that feeling is understandable. And the script actually does challenge this common misconception that individual actions alone are the solution.
Okay.
It emphasizes that what's ultimately needed is systemic change.
Okay, so you mean like changing policies, holding corporations accountable, really shifting away from fossil fuels on a large scale?
Exactly. And the script highlights a truly staggering statistic.
Okay, hit me.
71% of global emissions
Wow.
come from just 100 companies.
That's crazy.
It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it?
It does. It makes it clear that individual actions, while important, aren't going to cut it.
Right.
We need to target the source of the problem. But how do we do that? I mean, short of becoming eco-warrior CEOs and staging some kind of mass corporate takeover.
Well, the script offers some more practical suggestions, thankfully.
Okay, good.
It starts with something we can all do regardless of our age or where we live.
Oh, okay. Voting.
Right. Voting for leaders who actually prioritize climate action and are willing to stand up to those powerful lobbies that we talked about.
Exactly. But what about those of us who aren't old enough to vote yet? Or, live in countries where our voices aren't really heard in the political system? Is there anything we can do?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The script suggests we can use our power as consumers and investors.
Okay.
It talks about divesting from fossil fuel industries.
Divesting meaning?
Meaning moving your money away from banks and funds that support those companies.
So hitting them where it hurts their bottom line.
Exactly.
What else?
Well, we can actively support renewable energy.
Okay.
whether it's by installing solar panels on our own homes
Right.
or advocating for larger-scale projects like wind farms.
So it's about shifting our dependence away from fossil fuels, both individually and collectively.
Exactly.
It feels empowering to think about putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak, supporting the solutions we want to see.
Absolutely.
But what about taking a more active role in holding these companies accountable?
The script doesn't shy away from that either.
Oh.
It mentions protests, petitions, even boycotts as ways to apply pressure and force change.
Right.
Remember the example of Shell having to halt their Arctic drilling project due to public outcry.
Yeah, people power can actually work.
It absolutely can.
But I have to admit, sometimes it feels like we're screaming into the void. Like, even with all this activism and consumer pressure, are we really making a dent? Is it enough?
That feeling of helplessness is something the script addresses directly.
Okay.
It emphasizes the power of knowledge and education.
Okay.
Not just educating ourselves, but spreading awareness and engaging in those crucial conversations.
Like sharing this very podcast with that uncle who's still convinced that climate change is a hoax.
Exactly, because ultimately it's about shifting the narrative, raising awareness, and building a collective understanding of the urgency and scale of the problem.
Knowledge is power, after all.
It really is.
But let's be real for a second. Even if we do all of this, we vote, we divest, we protest, we educate, is it really enough? The script didn't exactly paint a rosy picture of our future.
That's the big question, isn't it? And the script doesn't sugarcoat the urgency of the situation. It actually mentions that scientists estimate we have about 7 years to cut emissions in half if we want to avoid catastrophic warming.
7 years. That feels incredibly short. I mean, that's less time than it took for that one popular TV show to go from being amazing to a complete train wreck.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
It really underscores the fact that we're on a tight timeline.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the crux of the script's message.
Okay.
It's not about whether or not climate change is happening.
Right.
It's about what we choose to do about it.
Fight for the future or let it burn right.
Exactly.
That's the choice it presents. But how do we even begin to fight something this big? Where do we even start?
That's where the script, in my opinion, offers its most powerful insight.
Okay, I'm listening.
It reminds us that the worst thing we can do is nothing.
Okay.
Every action, no matter how small, is a step in the right direction.
So it's not about individual perfection, it's about collective action. It's about everyone doing what they can wherever they are with whatever resources they have.
Exactly. It's about understanding that we're all in this together and that our collective choices will determine the future of our planet.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what key takeaway do you want to leave our listener with?
I think the most important message is this. While the situation is dire, it's not hopeless. We still have time to act, and every action we take matters.
I love that. It's a message of both urgency and empowerment. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've learned so far, because we've covered a lot of ground. What stood out to you from all of this? It really has been quite a journey, this deep dive, hasn't it?
It has.
I mean, we've gone from the science behind rising temperatures to the complexities of systemic change and what we as individuals can do.
Yeah?
It's been a lot to process.
It really has. This script takes us on, I think, kind of a roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
From the shock of those initial facts to the, kind of despair of the potential consequences. And then ultimately, I think, a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
When we start to explore some of those solutions.
Yeah, that's what struck me too. It's not just, like a dry recitation of facts and figures. It's a story, a narrative that pulls you in and makes you confront this reality.
I think that's what makes it so effective.
Yeah.
Connecting with us on that emotional level, because it's not enough to just understand the science.
Right.
We have to feel it.
Yeah, the urgency of it all.
Exactly.
And, for me, one of the most impactful parts was that image of the ticking clock.
Yeah.
7 years to cut emissions in half.
It's not a lot of time.
It's not a lot of time at all. I mean, that's less time than it took for that one popular TV show to go from, being amazing to a complete train wreck.
It's a stark reminder that we're running out of time.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to that central question. Fight for the future or let it burn.
Right.
It's a choice we all have to make, both individually and collectively.
And I have to admit, after that first part of our deep dive, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed.
Understandably so.
But the script also highlighted something so crucial, the power of collective action,
Yeah.
It's not about individual perfection, it's about all of us.
Doing what we can.
Exactly. Doing what we can, however we can.
And remember that statistic, 71% of global emissions coming from just 100 companies.
Yeah.
Imagine if we could harness our collective power
Yeah.
as consumers, investors, and citizens to hold those companies accountable.
That's where the real change is going to happen.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that even though the situation is, quite dire,
Yeah,
we're not powerless. There's still so much we can do.
absolutely.
I'm curious, from everything we've discussed, what stood out to you the most? What's resonating with you right now?
I think for me, it's the realization that this isn't just about saving the planet.
Yeah.
It's about saving ourselves.
It's about the future of humanity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that realization is both terrifying and incredibly motivating.
I couldn't agree more. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, to each other, to the planet, to future generations. And the choices that we're making today are going to determine the legacy we leave behind.
And those choices don't have to be these grand gestures.
Right.
It can be as simple as having those difficult conversations, supporting sustainable businesses, educating ourselves and others.
Right.
Every action, no matter how small, ripples outwards.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. What will you choose to do?
Yeah.
Will you fight for the future or let it burn?
The choice is yours.
And remember, you don't have to face this alone.
Yeah.
There are countless individuals and organizations out there working tirelessly to address the climate crisis. So find your community, connect with others, and let's create the future we want to see.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey. We hope this deep dive has sparked some new ideas, challenged some assumptions, and most importantly, inspired you to take action, because together we can make a difference.